Yeah, well, we think.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the Substack. We're coming to you from YouTube, LinkedIn, and Substack. And we're joined by Jacob Kaarsbo. Am I saying that right, Jacob? Your surname?
Yeah, more or less. More or
More or
less. I
less.
think Danes would probably say it differently, but it doesn't matter.
No, well, I want to get it right because this is hopefully the first of what's going to be quite a few streams together. So, I mean,
Yeah,
tell me a little bit
Danes
about
would
your
say
background.
Jakob Kaarsbo, but it doesn't matter really. I've worked abroad in many years, so people often say Jacob Kaarsbo, and I say it's a bit like Carlsberg, so that's it.
Okay, oh, well, that's it. I'm going to call you Jacob Carlsberg now. Being English, I have to obviously make a reference to a pint or something like that. But amazing. So, yeah, as I say, everyone, welcome to this inaugural, what hopefully is going to be like a weekly stream with Jacob. We've been chatting on and off, and as many of you know, I'm more active on Substack now because I think it's got quite a unique quality to it that YouTube is a bit more restrictive. I think, let's be honest, YouTube has its limits of what you can and you can't say, or what you can and can't show. Substack doesn't, and it's also, I think, important to diversify. But Jacob, yeah, you've been one of the most, I think, potent voices on the platform for many a time. I've been on there at this point, and I enjoy your daily updates with Malcolm Nance and with Gia Lion and on Iran. But we want to sort of talk about Ukraine, which you have vividly behind you on the front lines. And I mean, this isn't really an interview. Maybe you wanted to be, but I sort of thought it was more of an open conversation discussion.
Yeah.
But, I'm kind of curious to start off with. We've had this strike on the Crimean beach in the past 24 hours. And we've also had an explosion in a Moscow restaurant, which I did a video on yesterday. And basically, we've got more notable individual events happening. Is this just the way that the war is now to you? These isolated events that have implications over time.
Yeah, I think a lot of the strikes from the Ukrainian side don't make it through to the mainstream media and so on, because for some months quite a lot has been going on, and for sure now the Ukrainians are really striking hard at this what they call the logistical lockdown of Crimea, and also these Russian income generators like the wild berries. And apparently, this strike that I guess most of our viewers would have also seen in the last 24 hours that ended up hitting a beach was apparently aimed at at some industry linked to the Russian military complex, and then the Russians shut it down before it reached, and then it crashed on the beach. So a lot of stuff is going on, and around Crimea, for instance, there's not a complete blackout, but in many areas a complete blackout, and in some of the larger cities, partial blackout. So these deep strikes are having a lot of impact.
I was on mute. I'm good at this. You can tell I'm a natural at streaming. No, I mean, the strike on Crimea makes me think about one thing specifically, Jacob, which avid viewers will know, was the strike a couple of years ago. I can't remember if it was around about this time or slightly earlier, but there was another strike in Crimea, which led to a significant loss of life as well. And it came out to be, I think, eventually the recognition was it was actually the debris from a Russian interceptor. It wasn't a direct missile hit from Ukraine. It was obviously Putinists and bots jumped on this idea of sort of Ukraine is targeting civilians. But it was a Russian interceptor missile that had broken up, fragmented in the air, and then fragments of it landed on beachgoers, holidaymakers, and so on. Is that a similar case now, or this situation is different?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. That's what it looks like. Actually, I've seen videos where you can hear the Russians targeting this drone, and then it goes down on the beach. So that is the most likely scenario, and it's interesting because we were debating the other day these infrastructure strikes in that Trump had been talking about in Iran, where that is a war crime. And why isn't it a war crime when Ukraine does it in Crimea? That is because Crimea is occupied by the Russians, so it's occupied territory. So, the Russians in Crimea actually have the opportunity to go home, and that's how it is, and that's part of that whole legal debate. So there's often this tendency to misunderstand these differences that clearly is. I was on a Danish radio program on when was it, last Thursday, a debate program. I was also being asked, but what if the Ukrainians start doing X, Y, Z? And I was saying, well, why are we even debating whether, the Ukrainians would strike at the heart of Moscow, etc., etc.? They are actually trying to aim at military targets, and there's a law around proportionality, and taking ample consideration for the presence of civilians, etc., etc. And the Russians have the opportunity to stop this, and that is the big difference when you see strikes going the other way into Ukraine. I mean, they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, I mean, look, I took a couple of extra courses in international humanitarian law in law of armed conflict a couple of years ago, and certainly the principles of proportionality and precaution come to mind. In the case of Iran, especially, the Iranians are very much on the emphasis of proportionality. And they've said this bluntly, if you stop striking, so will we. If you hit this, we'll hit something of a similar nature, a similar level, a similar magnitude as well. So the Iranians abide by it quite intently, but obviously we can talk about their adherence to other forms of, say, human rights law.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're good at exercising it as a sort of to play the media, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in this case, the Russians tend to have a habit of calling out or pointing the fingers at Ukraine about this. But the difference being, as you say, Crimea is occupied by Moscow, and there's debate over sort of, does it veer more Russian or Ukrainian? Well, it's kind of irrelevant. Legally speaking,
Yeah.
it's recognized territorially as Ukraine. It has been since Khrushchev gave it in 1954. And if the Russians had really wanted to discuss reobtaining it, then they could have done through legal channels upon the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but they didn't. So
Exactly.
it's a moot point, I guess, is the emphasis there. And what I also think is quite interesting, Jacob, is just the idea of all the Russians that are leaving Crimea being forced to flee. Well, if they just stopped fighting and invading Ukraine, then the war wouldn't be a problem. I'm pretty
Exactly.
sure that there could be an arrangement. I mean, it's irrelevant now; it's never going to exist. But in the old days, there could have been an agreement over mutual usage of Crimea. Right? Russia uses Sevastopol for whatever reasons, and
There were agreements. I believe the agreement back in 2014 went until, if I recall correctly, something like 2040.
the Minsk
The
agreement.
Russian basing rights in Sevastopol. Uh, that was agreed after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and those agreements went until something like 2035 or 2040 or something like that. So these things were agreed back then.
Yeah, no, there were several concerted efforts to find diplomatic and bilateral solutions to. I mean, I was in Ukraine, Russia during the period during the 2010s, early 2010s, and it was tense, but you could go between the two countries no problem. There were visa programs, you could study between both. I have plenty of friends who was doing that right up until 2022, but it was Putin's obsession with trying to it's a bit like Russia, Taiwan, and China. I feel the more that the Chinese put pressure on Taiwan to pivot towards the one China policy, the more it has the counter effect in for making more Taiwanese want to identify as independent. And it's the same with the Russians putting pressure on Crimea. The more you put pressure on Ukraine to sort of be solely under the influence of Russia, the more the Ukrainians are like, well, no, we kind of want to have our trading relations and opportunities with Europe and the West. It doesn't mean we, don't have any appreciation for our long-standing history, but no, Putin didn't get any of that. So anyway.
I mean, I've been in this business since the early 90s, and we already knew about these things in the early 90s, and that's why what was formerly known as the CSCE, the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, that was upgraded to the OSCE and institutionalized, took care of all these things, and it's also written into the NATO-Russia cooperation agreement, etc., etc. But Russia has pulled out of all these fora and blatantly violated all the agreements that were made, in the European and Euro-Atlantic structures that were set up for the same purpose and were set up to avoid this precise scenario. And we can just say that little did it matter at the end of the day. But, people should always remember that the Europeans and the Americans back then actually tried to sort out this, because we all knew these dangers of minorities, etc., etc. And it wasn't only in Ukraine; it's throughout Europe. It's even, let me give, Denmark and Germany have had these minorities issues and has sorted it out since forever, since the Second World War. And Hungary and Slovakia, etc., etc. So it's always, and we all knew about it, and everyone knows about the war in the wars on the Balkans in the 90s. The exact same story. So there have been agreements and organizations set up to prevent this, but little did it matter because Putin wanted something else.
Yeah, certainly. I just got back from the Balkans on an extended bit of a summer trip. I was still covering events as best one could, but certainly whenever you visit that part of the world, you recognize the remnants of the wars. I really love a podcast series right now called Real Dictators on by the Noiser Network. It's a very popular creator of different types of podcast series, and it's all about the lives and times of dictators, and the latest one they just released was about Tito. So very interesting to be in Croatia, learning about Tito and some of those decisions, the relationship with Yugoslavia to the Soviet Union, and I think it made me also think a little bit about the unique approach that the Soviet Union or Moscow has always had towards imperialism, in the sense of when the UK or the British, the Spanish, the Germans, the French, whoever, the European empires always approached it slightly differently. And there seems to be a bit of an embedded, I'll put it this way, territorial expansion and the relationship of land to the expansion of empire or to the national identity is heavily embedded in the Russian psyche. I can say this because I am half Russian, so I know it. But in England and other European states, it's diluted over time, and the recognition of decolonization is not something that Moscow has had to go through yet. The dissolution of the Soviet Union was not the same as the end of the British Empire, right? It was a gradual and gradual car crash, and then boom, suddenly you have the 18 whatever plus nations existing, and Moscow never fully, I think, coming to an acceptance that was the new reality. At least Putin didn't. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you disagree with me, but
No, no,
I
fully,
think it's
fully.
fascinating to try to
Yeah,
understand the Russian mentality. Because if we want to understand how this war ends or how we resolve this longer term, we have to understand the Russian mindset,
yeah.
which is unfortunately not as evolved yet.
No,
Yeah. Anyway, I could go on, but
yeah. There have been historical parallels where you could say, it took ultimately defeat to rid that thinking from
yeah,
people's minds,
precisely.
and if the Ukrainians can defeat the Russian forces inside of Ukraine, we'll see whether that is indeed enough. Uh, I don't know whether it is, but then we have to be ready to deter Russia for many many years to come, deter them militarily, and not
Yeah,
leave
certainly.
a weak link. So yeah,
Well, just on that point, then, I mean, one of the other developments in the past couple of days, as I said on Saturday, was this explosion, this attack on this restaurant. It was
yeah,
against General Alexandri Chekhu,
yeah.
Chekov. I forget his surname exactly. But what's your make of that? That seems like quite a big deal. Another one of these targeted efforts by the Ukrainians to decapitate, so to speak, the most senior Russian military leadership, Chaiko, Alexandry Chaiko.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've seen, you know, hits before. I'm not sure quite of this magnitude. Yeah, we saw something early on in the war that was quite at a high level as well. But it's been a long time. But we know that the Ukrainians are capable of doing these undercover hits, and that seems to me the likely what has played out there in Moscow over the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's. I look at this in two ways, right? Firstly, that this is a pattern. This is a very systematic effort by the Ukrainians to
Mm.
target different senior generals, and on the most part, I mean, we can go back to December 2024. This is fresh in my mind because I made a
Yeah,
video analysis on it yesterday. But yeah, go back to December
but
2024 when there was a car bomb. There was one under some bloke's
yeah,
motorbike, but no windows. No one's been pushed out of windows yet, which is the missing
the,
link there.
the Russians sort that out themselves, right?
Yeah, but what I think is more crazy, Jacob, and sort of the second point is that it shows you how inadequate and ineffective the FSB is being, right? The security services are failing to protect the senior military personnel that are the architects of this entire war, which is kind of crazy to
Yeah,
me.
it is crazy, but again, we've not seen these losses of generals have much of an impact because the early on in the war the Ukrainians successfully targeted generals at the front lines or behind the front lines, in the headquarters, etc., etc. I can't There were so many that were taken out early on in the war as soon as they got too close to the front lines. So I mean, we've seen that the Russian military is capable of, adjusting and finding new people, and I think, to be honest, I think this whole campaign that we are seeing to weaken the Russian logistics is perhaps more important for the war and how that is going to evolve, in the coming months and presumably the coming year, because that is something that will really, as time goes by, weaken the forces, it seems, and especially. in the western part of the occupied territories and Crimea. So let's see how that pans out. But I'm following that closely, and those counts of supply trucks, etc., that are being hit is it's enormous, and it's only going up every month since March. It's just up and up and up when you see the counts, and these are verified strikes, verified through geolocated videos and photos, and it will eventually lead to a very troublesome situation for the forces especially in the western part of the occupied territories.
Yeah, I wanted to also dig into a little bit well, actually, just on that point, that's another thing I thought is worth highlighting. So one of the casualties, one of the fatalities in the strike on Saturday was a 27-year-old guy who he was married to the daughter of General Chaiko. So, and he
Yeah.
fled in 2022 when Putin undertook his partial mobilization, which is if it's 300 plus thousand people. I think it's a
Yeah.
full mobilization, but okay. It's a partial mobilization. I'm being very sarcastic. Partial mobilization by Putin.
Yeah.
And you had all those videos of people fleeing to Georgia, Kazakhstan,
Yeah.
anywhere else they could get out. But he came back eventually. But anyway, I think it's a massive irony, a tragic irony, that the guy who fled, we don't know why
Yeah.
he fled, is now being killed at the hands of the general who, well, his daughter is now a widower because of his actions.
Yeah.
And it just gets me thinking about the prospect of a second round of mobilization, because that looks increasingly likely to me.
Yes.
I don't know about you, but I think it would be done after you've got the State Duma elections in the
Mm.
fall, and Putin's not going to do it before then. But also, he doesn't really have a choice. And this is what I'm really curious to
Mm.
hear your thoughts on, which is that
Mm.
either he doesn't and he accepts that the front line is severely degraded,
Yeah.
or he does call a mobilization, but he then has to accept and acknowledge that the war is not going to plan because he's had to call more people up. So he
Yeah.
doesn't win either way.
Exactly, but and it's a double-edged sword, because the reason why Putin has always held back is also that he's fully aware of the internal political implications of it, and doing that at a larger scale once again. So it's not an easy thing to do. What we've seen over this springtime especially
Yeah.
is the fact that the Russians are losing more soldiers than they're able to recruit, something like 5,000 a month, give or take. And of course, that's a problem. So it's in the light of that. So there's new pressure on the Russians. But again, we also know what the Ukrainians aim at, because they managed to really make their strike packages much more effective over the last year, especially. And this figure that they've been able to take 35,000 Russian soldiers off the battlefield each month. They aim for 50,000. And if you look at the increasing capacity that the Ukrainians have, both in terms of drones, but also in terms of missile capability, it'd be dangerous to bet against them, because the reason why the Ukrainians are at where they're at now is this increasing capacity that they can make themselves with European help, European finance, and that European finance is only kicking in now. The this strike scenario has been achieved by the Ukrainians themselves, obviously with some European help, not least from my own country here, Denmark, that started this model of supporting the Ukrainian defense industry. But that has been taken to an institutionalized European level, and that is millions and millions of euros that will be flushed into the Ukrainian defense industry. Something is it 60 billion euros all in all, and I think it's about 35 billion this year. That is considerable, that is massive. And that's going to lead to increasing capacity. And we know what the Ukrainians have achieved without that capacity, so it will go it will go up and up. So those 50,000 soldiers that the Ukrainians hope to be able to take off the battlefield each month, well, it could materialize in say 6 months.
Yeah, the we had General Wesley Clark on the show about a month ago, and he was the former Supreme Commander of NATO during the
Yep.
Kosovo Wars. And one of the things I was interested to hear from him, he surprised me with his position on Iran, I won't deny, but on Ukraine he was more no, he seems to be quite supportive of Trump's actions, which I don't
Yeah,
understand.
that is
But
common for people that don't know the region all that well. So,
perhaps,
as a Kurd, perhaps hasn't been exposed to the realities of the Middle East. So, I'm
perhaps,
afraid.
perhaps, but he, one of the other questions I asked him was about obviously NATO, its capacity to function and deter, more importantly, uh, the strongmen. Let's be honest, Putin or
Mm,
Trump in this case, or
yeah.
maybe even Xi, by extension,
Mm,
over without the United States. Now, Denmark has obviously been disproportionately one of the biggest supporters of Ukraine with military equipment and funding like the Baltics. So I'm just kind of curious what you think about the state of NATO right now. We've had the summit. It seemed relatively reassuring. European nations do seem to be stepping up, but do you think they have the real propensity to be a strong deterrent against Moscow without the United States backing?
You know, Putin is very good at exploiting, little disagreements and trying to divide, and that is my main worry, because NATO is divided, and everyone knows that a provocation by Russia is unlikely to be met by force by the Trump administration. And NATO's deterrence until now has relied on the American backbone. And, I think, to be honest, the Europeans are doing a reasonable job at getting in the game, and showing unity. It's not that I'm saying it's anywhere near enough. And I'm often in Danish media the ones to say we need to do more. It's fine that we've achieved X, Y, and Z, but much more is needed. And this whole thing of um, a European Article 5, I think is super important, because if Putin gets the impression that the Europeans are not, showing solidarity, and, he will, the risk is that Putin will try to peel us off one by one from collective defense, so the big question, and the big challenge for the Europeans is to convince Russia that we are indeed united, and we will act as one, and we are able to fight together at the massive scale. without even American leadership if push comes to shove. And I think that is the big future challenge. And let's be honest, Ukraine wants to be a part of NATO. I was in Ukraine in the spring of 2024, where I said to my Ukrainian interlocutors, also some at quite a high governmental level, that I'm sorry to spoil the party, but the Biden administration is too scared to let you in. And if Trump wins, there's no way in the world that he will let you in. So we have to find out something else. And, look what the Ukrainians can achieve against Russia. And look, if the Europeans and the Ukrainians, had an Article 5 between them, I think we could deter the Russians, but that is, in my view, what is needed in the future. I wish the best for NATO, but an unwilling United States, it would take a complete internal revolution of the Republican Party in the U.S. to have the belief that NATO is solid, because we'd always be only 4 years away from all this craziness. Because for instance, my country, Greenland. Trump wants Greenland. You look at Article 1 in the NATO treaty, in the Washington Treaty. He's already putting that in the garbage, in the trash, and we can't have that. That is the treaty, and if the largest member doesn't respect the treaty, it just tells everyone around the world that the US is headed in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that one has to be realistic with what we can do to de-risk ourselves. I think that's the word of the hour, is de-risk or untangle. I'm European first and foremost. I'm a pan-Europeanist as much as I want to be a transatlanticist. But I think Europe's biggest, and it goes beyond just Russia, Ukraine. This is about the entire international order, about a grand strategy and the way that Europe has to try to navigate what I call the international disorder, right? The great powers increasingly putting pressure on middle powers, smaller powers. But we have to be realistic in that Europe as a single entity has a bit of a way to go. We had General H.R. McMaster on the show yesterday, interview coming out soon, and he's a big hawk, right? He's heavily pro-United States, and he supports Europe. But I also point blankly said, so you don't think that NATO can support itself without the US? And he was like, no, of course not. Like, it's not saying that Europe doesn't have a lot to offer, but it's preposterous to imagine the US out of NATO or Europe without the United States behind it, especially in areas like surveillance, logistics. But, I'm bullish on Europe. And if push comes to shove, as we've seen in just over a year, the Europeans have done, I mean, relative to before, we shouldn't have let it get to this stage in the first place. But I think we're doing quite a lot. Yeah. The prioritization of defense, right? And our own futures instead of depending upon others. That even the events in Spain over the weekend were a big wake-up call for a lot of nations about their southern border and the NATO southern flank. And this is a place where NATO, I think, has a role aside from the East, but also the Arctic, including with Greenland. So
it's interesting you mention it. I just want to inject a little point here, because I'm often asked, because we have this way in Europe of bashing each other, and the Spanish don't want to support Ukraine and blah blah blah. But again, we from Northern Europe have not supported the Spanish or the Italians or the Greeks adequately in their main challenge, that is to build a bulwark against immigration. And back when the big refugee crisis that came out of Syria, when that erupted, in Denmark, for instance, we started to patrol our borders in violation of the Schengen agreement instead of helping, do that at the where the problem is, and that shows a lack of European solidarity. And that many Danes forget that, and they say, oh, why won't the Spanish pay up and support Ukraine, and why we've not shown the same solidarity in the south either. So we need to remember that, and this is about a common European understanding of what is required.
This is why I was keen to start hosting these weekly streams with you, Jacob, because as a Dane, you're objective, you're balanced, you can recognize the challenges of Europe, right? I know. I think that's a really self-aware point. A lot of emphasis is on the southern states for not recognizing their commitments to NATO and Ukraine, but it's a fair point that the Nordic states, well, Northern Europe doesn't really have the same problem. I mean, Sweden might pipe up at that point, but certainly that's a very interesting, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about Putin's capacity to divide the Europeans, because when there's distrust or disputes over minor issues, he's good at abling to amplify that. Certainly with
Yeah,
the
I
loss
mean,
of Orban, though, that's
and and
broken.
and, and what happened in Morocco, I can't say. All I can say is that when you look at Putin's propagandists in the social media world, also in the West, Kirill Dmitriev, for instance, he's just banging away at this to try to divide the Europeans, and as are some of the MAGA propagandists. And I have to say, Donald Trump and the Trump administration could do away with all these suspicions if they scrap their national security strategy, where it says one of the goals of the Trump administration in national security is to cultivate resistance in Europe, and that is precisely to divide Europe, and have us one on one, to be able to isolate us and dominate us, and that is terrible. And that is why my book, it was written before the national security strategy, but that is on how Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are subverting Danish and European security. It's not been translated yet, but I'm working on it. And I'll, if I get an agreement to have it translated, what I'll do, it's some of it is very particularly Danish, but I'll do it from a more European angle, because it's the same thing and it's the same stuff we're seeing, and yeah.
No, but Denmark's been at the forefront of Trump's wrath, other than Spain being threatened with, an embargo or whatever the hell Trump threatened because Spain didn't want to allow them to utilize their bases. But Denmark over Greenland. And the most bizarre thing is that when a sitting vice president flies over to essentially lobby on behalf of another sovereign government to try and get him to be re-elected. Name me one other time in history that's happened. I'm talking about Hungary, but when Viktor Orban was receiving JD Vance on stage, and JD Vance is literally, why? Who gives a shit? No offense, but why do the Americans give a shit about Hungary? And it's because Trump recognizes the benefits of Viktor Orban for his self-interests, and obviously Putin as well. The favoritism Trump has for Putin is obvious, but
and the MAGA sphere have done it in Romania and Poland, etc., and that is subversive influence. And that's something we have to recognize and act upon. I don't know if you know it, but Donald Trump's ambassador here in Copenhagen, he has actually supported, then donated millions of dollars to one of these enterprises that are behind these ideas of taking over Greenland. So he's personally involved. He's a former business partner of Peter Thiel of Palantir, and we all know his points of view, right? And they don't respect democracy, and they want to go have the world go a different way, and that is what is behind all this, and we
Mm.
have to understand it and act upon it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes me think of another article I read in the Financial Times several months ago now. Maybe you're familiar with the phenomenon, but right now we have, well, there's always a split in Europe, which I think is the biggest challenge. How do
Mm,
we balance keeping the sovereignty of every nation versus the
mm,
need to perhaps federalize or
yeah,
deepen unity to ensure that there is a more streamlined set of decision making?
yeah,
This is the fundamental underpinning challenge of the European Union
yeah.
as a concept, as an entity, but and why Brexit, obviously,
Mm,
but because I'm coming from London, yay. Anyway, so no, but it's the Trump's impact on Europe, his continued threats on European sovereignty, territorial integrity, etc., led to such a point that you even had populists or relative populists, Maloney,
mm,
Marine Le Pen, even the AFD, even
mm.
the PiS party of Poland, all these parties, or ones in the Baltic states or the Nordic states, right? All these parties that you would think are fundamentally and often Eurosceptic are like, we need to deepen our integration for the protection against the threats of Trump's administration.
Mm.
Are you no way? Trump is single-handedly rewriting the way that Eurosceptic right-wing parties look at the European Union, which is
Yeah,
insane, absolute
yeah.
insanity. I think
An
I'm pro any of
interesting
these parties. I'm just
and
saying, like the
a
implication.
super interesting poll that was made in Germany. It showed that most of the AfD voters would support the German government sending German soldiers to Greenland to help defend Greenland if Trump wanted to attack Greenland.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
Uh, so
A lot. It was very prevalent. I can't remember. It wasn't a majority, but it was, high up. It was something like between 40 and 50%, I believe,
yeah, I mean
of
the reason I
AfD voters.
well, I mean, all one has to do is look at a demographic map of Germany and see how remnant the split is after the Cold War,
Yeah.
right? It's still very
Yeah.
very prevalent. But the other thing I was kind of curious for you as someone from Denmark is like, Danish politics. I know nothing about it, very limitedly,
Mm,
but what's interesting me is the Social Democrats as a political party, because they're quite left leaning, from my
mm.
understanding, center
Yeah.
left, but they have quite strong restrictive policies over migration.
Mm,
Back to what we were talking about, and I think this is, I'm just using them as an example because I think it
mm.
demonstrates the blurriness that is occurring in European politics now. Parties that were always seen to be heavily nationalistic, anti-EU or Eurosceptic about how much integration was needed or useful, has become more blurred because of the threat from exogenous factors from people like Trump or Putin in different ways.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, like, what does that bode for the future of the European continent as a whole, right? Does it mean that the European Union can function? Does it mean NATO can function to you? Like, I know this is a very conceptual
No,
question. It's kind of
yeah.
interesting.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens, and I think we have to we have to remember we're only 18 months into the Trump administration, so we're only this is actually only just started, and we don't know where it will end. I think, to be honest, I'm one of the the people who think, we need to do something about the treaty. I'm fully aware how difficult it is to make new European treaties, how time consuming it is. But in terms of defense and security, you know, if you told Europeans, the real thing here, this whole idea of 5% is crazy. We don't need 5% to be able to deter Russia. We could make do with, three, perhaps, if we use the money at a European level. I'm often saying to Danes, but you need to realize it's not going to happen that we have to defend our own borders anyway, and all this national defense planning is a waste of money, and we have to, make it at the European level anyway. And if you tell voters you can actually get much more money for schools and health and whatever you want, if if we have European defense and security, people are, oh, right. And it's a simple breakdown, of procurement, defense planning, etc., right? As it is now, all those billions and billions and gazillions of euros are administered in each capital, and they actually compete for the same limited resources of equipment, for instance,
Mm.
and the prices go only one way, that's up. And it's like, we need we need to do something here. We can save billions and billions and billions that we can use much more efficiently. And that debate I really miss in Europe, because this is looking after people and it's about getting more for everyone, and it's completely absurd that we won't surrender that perceived sovereignty, because it's perceived sovereignty. Denmark will never be able to defend our borders anyway. So if we don't defend this at the European level, it's useless.
Yeah, no, I feel you. I think it's a difficult one for me as well, right? Because I used to be more critical of the EU, but once Brexit happened and
Yeah.
also shifts in foreign policy and threats surrounding it, I'm obviously heavily pro Europe. And I think there's so much here. And that's why, for me, it was simply the idea of too far and too fast. The EU grew too quickly before we had ironed out a clear concept. And this is why I like the idea. Macron has noted it. I think Merz has raised it. The idea of, a tiered membership. I think that's quite an interesting idea. It's not easy to implement, but certainly there are countries that are perhaps more of the core or want to be more of the core. And then there are others that don't want to be. We have it effectively now with the Eurozone versus Schengen versus everything, right?
We are not in the Eurozone, which is ridiculous. We have to get euros every time we travel, etc., etc. But that's what voters decided many years ago.
Yeah. So, no, for me, I would simply say, to bring in NATO as well, like, this is why Europe as a collective is about $400 billion it spends on NATO, on defense, right? That's more than the Russians and the Chinese combined. And that's without us being in a wartime footing. We're in peacetime, or whatever, largely peacetime. And the Germans are reindustrializing. There's a reorientation. The Brits are now remodernizing their Trident fleet. There's a lot. I'm being idealistic here. I know that. I'm young. I'm impressionable. I've only been around since the end of the Cold War, so I don't know what it was like during the 70s or whatever. I don't know. But I recognize there are limitations to what can be achieved. But I think that the potential is there. We just have to be intelligent in the way that we go about it. And I mean that through the comparative advantages that each nation brings. Germany is an economic powerhouse. It's an industrial powerhouse. France is good at diplomacy. It has a lot of concepts. The Brits are good at intelligence. We're good at defense and things. The Danes, you guys are great at diplomacy and dealing with the nonsense that comes around. You're very good at putting up with other stuff. So I think that every country can play to their comparative advantage in certain ways, and it can leverage the EU, again, in a very idealistic sense, to be a genuine mega player globally. But we're not there yet, and it's going to take some time. Yeah, I always like to be bullish, not bearish on Europe, and not end on a sad note. And obviously Ukraine's on the front lines in all of this. And a lot of my audience on YouTube and maybe some of yours from Substack would agree that, Ukraine is more of a youthful partner than the United States in some ways, because they're leading the military advancement in drone technology. They know the front lines of modern warfare. I don't know. What do you think?
No. Clearly. I mean, in Europe, we are our own worst enemy. And it's because we don't have the political willingness and the political courage to do what's necessary. Because we have the money. We're rich enough. We have the technology. We have the brains. We've got everything. But we're letting ourselves be hostage because we're afraid of surrendering sovereignty in a number of areas. And I'm also a critic of the EU, and there's a lot of nonsense happening in the EU. But the EU is only as strong as the weakest link, and often when you look at it, all these things that annoy us about the EU is due to the fact that EU is a system that's easily hijacked by special interest. Because in many areas, it would take Hungarians to block something, or it would take others to block something, and that is why we are not as efficient as we should be, even though there would be a clear European majority if you elevated the discussion to the real European level. But hopefully that'll be the future.
Yeah, hopefully. But Jacob, I mean, it's been a pretty wide-ranging first conversation. No, but I mean, it's great. It's nice to sort of get to know one another and do this on the fly. But what are you watching in the next week before we reconnect? Like, anything on your horizon? It is August. Some things don't happen much in August. Other things do, like the counteroffensive of 4 years ago. Like, what's your thought?
No, I mean, every week I really look at what's happening with especially what the Ukrainians are doing. There's still Russian pressure in Donetsk, around Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. So those are different important points. But obviously, the whole Ukrainian strike campaign is hugely important. From a Danish perspective, always also don't forget Greenland, because there's stuff happening. I'm going to do a Substack on Thursday night about Greenland. Because there's still stuff happening that hasn't been talked about in the international media. Now, Trump, of course, due to his big problems in the Middle East, brought it up the other day and say, "Hello, Greenland," and posted that meme once again. And that's typical, because he wants to, have attention somewhere else now that he's facing trouble. So, being Danish, we also have to keep a lookout for that. And obviously, the Middle East, for me, as the former head of the Middle East in the Danish intelligence, that's that takes time for me as well.
Well, we'll have to maybe do a split stream then on that, because that's what I'm covering a lot as well. I mean, the Trump administration is saying that a deal is close with Iran. Good. That's good. I believe
No,
him.
it's not. It's not happening.
No, but wait, hang on, Jacob. We had a deal. Just remembered. We've got a deal, guys, but we had a deal last month.
And
Sorry, that was my mistake. I'm being silly.
Besant
Sorry.
saying, "Oh, there'll be a deal Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever he was saying." God.
No, I was having another chat with another colleague, another friend of the show who we have on, a chat called Professor James Kalinzi. Maybe you've come across his work. He's very active on the Balkans and Southeastern Europe, but he talks about a lot of different things. And we had a chat earlier, and he was just saying, like, why do we keep commenting every time this lunatic makes a statement about? So I'm going to be a bit more like Malcolm Nance now. I'm going to go slightly crazy and yell into the microphone. No, but like, why do we give this guy airtime? Yes, it's the president of the United States, but it's excuse me, it's a fucking joke that we still give him space. I mean, we have to acknowledge he's the president of the United States, but not every single time he says, "Oh, deal incoming." Who gives a shit? When they sit down and sign the bloody thing, then we give it space. But like, sorry.
What? You know, my brain freezes if I go up Monday morning, turn on the TV, and then I see our news shows just broadcasting these propaganda sessions from the Air Force One, where he's saying stuff that is just nonsensical, and the media, doesn't ask critical questions, and there's no one there to say, well, this is just complete nonsense. We have a lunatic standing there claiming all kinds of stuff that he's been claiming for six months, and there's absolutely no evidence behind it at all. It's just freestyling completely, and I think our media fails big time.
I get it. They need to get ratings. They need to engage in it. Otherwise, or whatever, especially with independent creators now, there's so much noise, but it's a proliferation of dis and misinformation about the war in Iran, about the rate at which something is about to happen or not. As we've been recording now or streaming, there's been an explosion somewhere near the Bab el-Mandeb.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one headline I've read from one thing on X. I'm going to go and read about it on another news channel. It's going to be like, no, that's not true. The war the war with Ukraine, and this will be my last point, and then I promise, we'll stop talking because I know you have other things to do. But the thing about the war in Ukraine is it's driven by one man's compulsive obsession over conquest, over historical ideological reasons. I'm not saying it's a legitimate reason. I'm just saying it's so much different than the rational decision that this was a war of choice, that the Americans and Israelis were like, oh, yeah, no, let's go in. It'll be fine. Decapitation strategy. Yeah, no, we'll end them all in a day. It was so optional. It was not needed. Nope. I'm not saying, I support the Islamic Republic and they could have stuck around and stuff, but this war is not going to be won by airstrikes and a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, sorry, you're the expert. I'll
Yeah, go back and watch the first shows of Malcolm and myself. We were saying it already then.
Wow, no, I will. So, there you go, then.
We were saying it already then. And today, actually, we were... something new surfaced in Israel about this crazy idea of arming the Kurds to do regime change. Yeah, no, but the whole planning on the part of the Netanyahu government, and how they presented this to the to Trump, and how intelligence professionals warned against it and said this is just delusional nonsense. It's a non-starter, but the politicians just, off we go, and it's crazy, but we said that from day one.
No, I guess, I would sort of say, for me, the war in Ukraine is one that is serious. There is no comicalness about it, right? It's other than Putin's idiocy in thinking that he could win. in the first place. But the war in Iran is just, for me, it's more funny. Not that I'm playing down the destruction that is happening, but it's such a joke. Like
Yeah,
it
it's a
can't be
bad
taken
movie.
seriously.
It's a bad movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a
I
bad
think
movie
I think
script.
what I'm saying makes sense, right? Maybe I'm not expressing it very clearly, but like,
Yeah.
you
No, we
know,
were discussing that today. I mean, if some of these plans that have been unearthed in Israel by a journalist called Nadav Eyal,
oh yeah,
we talked about it, Malcolm and I. It's a bad movie script. We if someone had come and said, "Okay, I'll do a movie about this," we'd say, "No, that is unrealistic. It's so stupid that we can't go on with this." But this is not a movie script. This is real life, and people's lives, and dead soldiers, and dead civilians in a lot of countries also. So
can I
yeah,
ask you one last
terrible.
quick question?
Yeah,
No, I know. Sorry, I know. We're going to keep it short, I promise. But because last week we had the strike on the Iranian tanker by Ukraine, right? And that
yeah,
was quite a scary moment. A lot of media, a lot of people are, it's World War III. Ukraine is trying to merge these wars. There's someone we have on the show often, and he wrote a piece on Substack, which was quite popular,
yeah.
about Ukraine trying to merge the wars together. Um,
Mm,
and I understand,
mm,
the idea of a united front might
mm,
benefit some actors, but it didn't make sense to me. The Ukrainians
mm,
trying to bring in the Iranians and the Russians to start targeting them on the
mm,
hope and assumption that
mm,
the Americans would
mm,
start fighting on
mm.
their behalf as well. It
Yeah,
didn't stack
this
up to me.
this is a silly media spun thing. You know, the Russian and Iranian cooperation has been there for years and years, and the Ukrainians have suffered because of it, and Trump doesn't want to acknowledge it. So this came out, and the Ukrainians stated what they had done because they wanted Trump to acknowledge that this is the axis of evil. These are cooperating, and it's hurting Ukraine, and it's hurting US soldiers in the Middle East. You have to stand up to Vladimir Putin. But Trump doesn't want to. So even though all the evidence is there of what the Russians and the Iranians are doing in this type of warfare, both in terms of drone development, but also in terms of ballistic missile development, is quite evident. But Trump doesn't want to acknowledge it, and that is actually the Ukrainian trying to, say to Trump, "Get your act together," but he doesn't want to. But that was what was behind it. And the only new thing, because Russian and Iranians ships in the Caspian have been sunk before, but the only new thing was that the Ukrainians made it public, and they made it public to put pressure on Donald Trump.
Interesting. I didn't know that angle. No, I mean, the Caspian Sea, that's been a bit of a lifeline for the Iranians.
Mm,
From my understanding, after the blockade was implemented by the United States, and there was one report, I think the Wall Street Journal said they had made about 6 billion in that time when the blockade was lifted, or before, in the time between when the MOU was signed and when the fighting restarted. They made a lot of cash, and that was primarily through the Caspian Sea. But what's also interesting is that within 24 hours, both the Ukrainians and Iranians said we don't want any further escalation, which demonstrates to me that this whole bollocks about it being some kind of, world war becoming World War III, it's all fronts uniting. It's not that case. The Iranians are rational actors, and they have no interest nor benefit from bringing the Ukrainians into this. The Russians are not going to support them further than they have done because they have nothing to spare. It's all in Ukraine.
exactly. Exactly.
So, but this is the difference between for everyone watching, right? Good content like us, and sensationalists who are like, "Oh,
Yeah.
it's all happening."
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
difference.
I
Anyway,
got a bit sensationalist because I put out a piece saying, "Are we heading towards a new world war?"
Oh,
to get
Jake, you
people's
didn't.
attention. But I answered the question by saying no.
Nice.
So,
Oh, I should do that. Maybe. Oh, I'm gonna have to learn some tips from you on Substack then, right? How to get people to click through and read my stuff and then
well,
subscribe, right?
I'm not the expert to to
Yeah, you're
to
doing good.
to
You've got a
answer
great
your
platform.
question. Yeah, but I'm not really good at that stuff. You see, I'm sitting here. I'm actually sitting here in my gym where I have the screen behind me. I no fancy setup, and usually when I have these Substack sessions, I use this red screwdriver as my pointer on my
Oh, I
mouse.
love that.
Why?
Oh, I love
Because
that. That's brilliant.
this red screwdriver was here because I fixed my bikes and stuff, and this was what was on the table. So
I love no, but I think that that's part of the charm, right? Well, people joke about me because I have a never-ending haircut. I don't cut my hair sometimes for ages, and so it looks super long. And then people are like, "Pyotr's." This is an old video. Pyotr's hair looks ridiculous, but for you, so that's one of your character traits, right? You
yeah,
are the guy
that's
with the screwdriver, not the laser pointer.
exactly.
Part of the charm. Don't change it. Keep it. I think it's great. Yeah, well, that's nice to. Anyway, everyone for watching. Thank you so much, Jacob. Absolute pleasure. Anything you want to shout out before we end? Anything you've got coming up?
It's good to kick this off, and we'll try to do these weekly sessions. There's enough to talk about, unfortunately, but let's keep it up and see where it takes us, Piotr. That's it's been a pleasure.
No, absolutely, Jacob. No, as I say, we've been talking about this for a while, everyone. Co-streaming from my channel to Substack and Jacob's Substack. You should be on YouTube, you know. I think people would love
Yeah,
to watch your
people
videos
have
with your
said people say that, so I better do something about it.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, so that's the idea. Every Tuesday around sort of 6 p.m. British time, 7 p.m. European time. You know, we may change the day or the timing depending upon what works best. If there's a time that you guys prefer or think would be better, let us know. But otherwise, that's sort of what we're thinking. And maybe, you know, Malcolm will join us or someone else will join us occasionally and do this on a weekly basis like this, you know, pretty casual. But I think it's still intellectually satisfying a conversation. But everyone, have a good one. Speak soon. Subscribe if you haven't already, and stay safe out there. Take care.
See ya.